everybody, and welcome to another Agile IT Tech Talk. I'm your host, Sean Spicer, and today I am joined by our CEO, Conrad Agramont, who hates it when I ask him, how you doing today, Conrad?
Good, great, energized, best as I can be.
Super energized, super happy because you don't have to deal with local AD anymore, right?
Man, I haven't done that in a while.
So today we're going to be talking about what we learned removing our own local AD, as well as some lessons learned we've done doing this, or lessons we've learned doing this for our clients as well. So Conrad really spearheaded this effort. Conrad, what are some of the reasons why somebody would want to do this?
I'm actually going to cover that topic. Let me steal my thunder and give out all the goodies so early. But we definitely went through some challenges when we did this ourselves, and we were, we had a lot of devices that were. We started off like a lot of other companies where we did have a local Active Directory. Started off where it was on-prem, then we moved it into the cloud. And the more and more that we looked at it, there just needed more caring and feeding. And when you have something that is the starting point of identity for your business, it's something that you can't neglect. But there's also, I hate to say it, there's no glory in it either, right? Because you don't, because it's this fundamental thing. And so, we had file servers before. We had, our own link server and exchange server. And obviously, as a business, we were doing a lot of things in the cloud. And as Microsoft provided more services to do better security, to do better management, there was just less of a need to have this. But it was so John Gillum, who was the founder and owner of the business, when we decided we were going to go do this, it was almost kind of emotional for him, right? Because he's like, but it's been here for so long, are you sure? It's like, John, but we're a cloud company. We can do it on the cloud. It's like, but once it goes away, I'm like, once it goes away, we don't need it. And it's exactly how it turned out. But it was such a big kind of cutoff. And even though we talk about it a lot with some customers and we do some planning with them, you find where it's equally as emotional in this way. Because again, it's you'll have a lot of applications, but there's ways to get out of it. So, but you also have this thing where you have to be able to VPN into it. You have to take care of the administration from it. You have to create your accounts there. The other thing is that, if you have a local Active Directory and you're syncing it with Azure Active Directory, AD Connect, and you're, do an Exchange online, then you also have to have an Exchange management server so that you can do all the properties and administration you need. So it gives all this overhead, and it just doesn't feel like it does anything else. I got this great Azure Active Directory environment that really does all the things that I need. So this was kind of the view in our heads of, well, but we want to go to this, right? We want to be able to do all the things in the cloud. I don't want to be stuck to this local Active Directory and all of its old things that we needed. Oh, you got to VPN in, you got to do all these group policies, and you got to do this. And sometimes I did get asked by customers like, hey, can you take a look at our Active Directory? No problem. We can do discovery and view and give recommendations. And the one question we get often is, can you look at all of our group policies? And my common answer is no. Right. For a couple of reasons. One, it's just such a nest of stuff. And a lot of times, when we look at it, most group policies aren't even turned on. And then we ask people like, why do you have this policy that does this thing? They're like, I don't know. And they're very nervous to change it. But when you transfer over to say, hey, we're not going to have those local Active Directory, we're only going to be managing our desktops directly with Azure Active Directory and Intune, you get to start asking those great questions now, because it's kind of, you're going to a clean area. What do we want our desktops to be managed for? What people? You get to start asking these really good questions and kind of design from there. So you don't have to go back and like, well, if we undo this group policy, then these people, you're making lots of changes. And in the end, you're probably not making that big of a difference. So moving it over to Intune Azure AD allows you to make that kind of big difference and just manage it very differently. So this is kind of like the end goal of where we wanted to go to. And just real quick, when you think about there's lots of places like you'll hear Active Directory. And normally when I talk, I say local Active Directory. I mean, the server itself might be in a data center or might be in Azure, but it's just the way that we reference it to distinguish clearly that we're not talking about Azure Active Directory. So it's local Active Directory, Azure Active Directory. I think I did a whole talk on these on all the Active Directories because it's kind of a nice recap. But I put it here just to remind us of these things. And plus, the identity, handling the username login, username password or MFA login, really it's one of two areas, local Active Directory or Azure Active Directory. But you do have to consider these other areas such as Azure Active Directory domain services, which really allows, the capability to still have local Active Directory experience or capabilities for servers that need it, but it's ran as a service and you don't have to manage it and patch it like you would local Active Directory. That's another talk. So, that's kind of where, it's good to think about that. So you start thinking about your own local infrastructure, right? Local Active Directory, workstations join against Active Directory. Yes, you can have hybrid where the workstations are both connected to local Active Directory as well as Azure Active Directory. And what happens there when you flip those? I'm not really going to cover that topic today, but but even there's something that changed because it's actually still really a local Active Directory bound machine. When you kind of really change it, you have other things like profiles and stuff, and I'll talk about that. But the other really big one are those servers, right? Whether it is a file server, a VPN server, whether it is we run QuickBooks on it, or we have some other kind of application that really uses local Active Directory. You have all this kind of infrastructure. And the other piece, and I really didn't talk about it earlier, but we really try and design the office and everything we do. I think these guys should give me money for advertising. Is we want to make it a big Starbucks, right? There's nothing fancy. Guest people, regular people, or corporate people, they could all be on the same internet connection because the boundary isn't the office internal network. The boundary is the device itself and your identity. And that's kind of the end goal where we're trying to get to. Where right now, you couldn't do that because people have to see local Active Directory. You're not going to put your guests on that network, so you got to do these other networks. So you start to think about it different. So the project that we went through, we said, well, look, we want to decommission local Active Directory. We want all the devices to just be directly Azure AD joined. We want the workstations and everything else to be fully Microsoft, done, and we want to capture our steps, what we learned, and all that, so that we can use as the basis as a project and deliver for customers and what we go do. What our goals at the time was to really fully automate the process, because sometimes we can do that in the next deployment with customers where we make the improvement. Not to say we try it out there, we'll automate it before, but you want to have those steps done before. So and the other goal was we didn't really work on a full communication plan at the time when we did it, but now we did, because there's a lot you really need to tell people, right, to prepare for this, to know the experience for this. By the time when we did the project, that wasn't our goal. And really, our assumptions is that there was, really no applications, that were really going to be disturbed by all this. We do everything in the cloud, and all the services we do are SaaS-based. So we're like, okay, it's kind of our assumption that's not going to be a big issue. So, in the beginning, we kind of looked like this, changed some things in here. But in essence, this is, we had already a virtual network. That's where our domain controllers were. It's just so happens to be in Azure, but it could be someplace else for you. And we did have, on site, an old kind of legacy server that we had for files and some other things that, again, sometimes it's hard to part ways with some of these things. So we said, all right, well, we kind of have this set up already. We had like Windows Virtual Desktop. So that's what you see up top there in the green box. So that was kind of our starting state. But really our end state, where we were trying to go, where we did end up, was like this. So we still have servers in the environment, but really it's services with Azure Active Directory domain services. The file server and the RDS host, really, that's Windows Virtual Desktop. So it's the only really reason you need that. And even since then, we removed the file server because we can use Azure Files to host essentially the profile paths for Windows Virtual Desktop. So even there, we've gone even more cloud for the things that we needed. But here, the one thing you see is we don't have another network over there anymore. We don't have a site-to-site VPN anymore. Also the thing that you see gone is Azure Active Directory Connect. I'll talk about that. So we were able to really reduce that infrastructure now, and now managing it is easier for us as a business because there's just less stuff to be there. And as you know, when you have less infrastructure pieces that you have to directly manage, you reduce the attack surface, so less things that people can attack. You reduce the level of investment needed in IT and our own services to be able to manage those things accordingly and handle things like backup and restores. You still have that, but in a very kind of cloud fashion. So that was our end goal, and it is still where we are today. So the things that we needed to really address in all this, one was, well, what's our current kind of traditional Windows infrastructure, right? What are our workstations, our group policies, users, just awareness. So we had to kind of take all that into account. Also applications. So what servers are running on Windows? Most likely they're authenticating against local Active Directory. But the real question is, for the line of business applications, of those, how do the users log into it? Some line of business apps, they'll say, oh, well, the application has its own username and password store that people connect into, which, is another fun topic of, well, maybe that should be fixed. But if they do log in with their accounts, like, well, when they log in, do they log in with domain/username? Do they log in with just the username and it assumes the domain? And could we change it? Is this, because we've had some customers like, well, I have, went from 50 boxes, but there's just this one, but only 3 people log into it. Do I really need to hold on local Active Directory for everybody for these 3? Maybe you can, maybe there's another way, and I'll talk a little bit about that. And then are there any servers that you have, Microsoft specific servers that you have, like Exchange, SharePoint, and we have to identify what we need to go do with those. And then, what are we going to do in Azure Active Directory? Because remember, before we were syncing between our local Active Directory through Azure AD Connect into Azure Active Directory. So the one question everybody asks, well, if you get rid of it, what happens to all the user accounts? What's going to happen? And I'll address that in a moment, but that's a big question. And how do you get there? And we do Azure AD, ADFS. What do we do with that? So these are the things that we knew we had to address it. So kind of our approach was, really 3 phases. Inventory, prepare, and execute. So first is, take inventory. What do you have? What applications do they have? How are they configured? And and really start to address how you can support those application servers. One example we had was, again, it was a server that was only used for a few people, and we decided that in the short term, because later on they're going to actually migrate this to the SaaS version of the provider. We said, all right, well, we already have the server in Azure. We're actually going to remove it from local Active Directory, and we're just going to leave it basically in a workgroup mode. And people are like, oh my God, workgroup, like, it's not a member of any Active Directory. What are you going to do? Well, you can still lock it down. You can still you don't do group policy, just do a local policy. And you're just managing this one server that's just kind of hanging on for a bit. And that's not the right thing for every solution, but that was one of them. So what's the inventory and what are the workstations? The other thing to prepare for was, when you have these workstations that were a part of local Active Directory and we're going to remove it, well, some things, one question was, well, do we have the local passwords for administrator on all those accounts? Because once it left, it's like, oh, it'll reboot, profile sitting on there. Yes, you can maybe join the domain, but if there's other stuff we need to do on it in the meantime, because you still have to be an administrator, remember, whatever user was there on their profile, it's still there, but they can't log in anymore. So during that time you leave local Active Directory and you're going to join Azure Active Directory and then update the profiles, somebody has to be administrator and somebody has to be there to go do it physically. There are ways to automate that, yes, but it's something you have to prepare for and make sure they have the BitLocker keys and in case it won't automatically decrypt or whatnot. So these are the things you have to be ready for. Because as we went through this, we were like, oh, wait a minute, how are we going to do this? So we tried it out with like one machine and we're like, oh, goodness. And so that's something we had to prepare for. And you can take weeks to do that if you want. So it's not a rush, but you need to have it. And then we started to execute. We're like, all right, first, so one of the things we did, this was just our approach, was we said, okay, we're going to start with some of our servers. So we powered them off. So here's one little tip. So we had some line of business applications. We had a couple, file server things, whatever. We didn't remove them from the domain. We just turned them off.
Scream
And
testing.
what's that?
Scream testing.
Screen
Turn
testing?
it off. Find out who yells, and then you know who's using that server.
Yeah, I mean, it serves two purposes. One, yes, you can find out who's using it, and when you do that, like some of them I didn't even tell anybody. Another one, we told people we were turning it off, and then we turned it off, and then you find out, hey, after a couple weeks, 2-3 weeks, which is normally a good waiting time, I would say for most businesses that they're not really sure and it looks like it's important, you really should leave it off for about a month and a half. Sometimes people don't use it until it's like payroll, right? Or the accounting department who does something once a month. Well,
quarterly reports.
Yeah, I mean, there's something. But anyway, you go collect, you communicate. But anyway, so the approach was, we were for the workstations, they do have to leave Active Directory so they can join Azure Active Directory and be fully managed. So those we had to. Everything else on the server side, we just gradually turned off, including the domain controllers. So, because they're like, well, do you have to, remove those servers from the server? Like, why? What's the point? It's all going to be turned off anyway. So, just turn them off. And the thing is, if something does wreak havoc, I can turn them back on. So, making them leave really doesn't serve a purpose. One thing we do have to do though is when you do one big final sync with Azure Active Directory Connect. And one of the reasons you do this is when people change their passwords, there's a password hash that then gets synchronized up to Azure Active Directory. So we made one more of those. There's a couple commands you run that basically tells Azure Active Directory Connect. Actually, what you do is there's a couple commands you send to the tenant, and you tell the tenant, hey, we're not going to sync anymore. AD Connect is still hanging out there thinking it's going to sync, and then it'll eventually fail, which is good because I deliberately did this. And what ends up happening is after about a certain period of time, Azure Active Directory is just going to say, well, I guess that went away, but I have all these users accounts and passwords. So I'm going to say that they're cloud accounts now, unless somebody else syncs with me and tells me different. So it was a really nice thing. First time you do it, like we did it for ourselves. We've done it many times since then. First time we did it for ourselves, I'll tell you, it is a nervous moment because you're like, I see the documentation, but this could go really bad. But if we could send another command, AD connect it, we would have been fine. So anyway, but we've done it several times since, and it's worked out really well. So we had to contend with some other things, like we got rid of the site-to-site VPN. We deleted all the devices, because remember it saw the devices before that were hybrid joined, but now they're going to be Azure AD joined, so they're actually a different device. So we had to go in there, clean those all up, delete them, and then power off all the servers, and we were living pretty happily. So one thing to consider for the line of business applications is, what can you move? Where can you move your files to? How do we want to handle the business applications? And I'll tell you, there is a way for all of them, but it is a nervous and emotional decision that normally requires lots and lots of discussions. A lot of times the technical implementation is far simpler, but it takes a lot of time to get people's head wrapped around it. Move your application to SaaS-based applications. Right now, people are doing a lot of that anyway. But the nice thing is, once you do this and you tie that authentication against Azure Active Directory, all the rules and policies that you should have for MFA conditional access now apply for all of them. So now when people are logging into, let's say you were using, Xero for accounting, and instead of having those usernames and passwords that your accountants go into, it should tie with, and it does work with, Azure Active Directory, so you can control it from one spot and you can see how they're logging in. And so you can start to protect those investments. And the third one really is, again, you really don't want to do a lift and shift for those line of business applications, because you still have to deal with that local AD, which is not what you're trying to get to. The best one is, no, we're going to redeploy that virtual machine. We're going to join it to Azure Active Directory domain services, because remember, that's a service that looks like Active Directory, behaves like Active Directory for the servers, but you don't actually, there's no virtual machines for you to log into, Microsoft does all the updates, Microsoft does all the backups, like and those identities come from Azure Active Directory. So it's a much cleaner way to manage that and still provide the kind of capabilities that's needed for those line of business applications. Again, removing the need kind of for local Active Directory. So when we did this, again, when we switched from local AD accounts to made them cloud accounts, it took about 7 hours to convert. Now, that conversion process, it's really after we send those commands to the tenant, and you just wait because, Azure Active Directory is like, well, I'm going to keep them. So if you look at the users, they'll normally say cloud, or it'll say Azure Active Directory now. So it'll say Azure Active Directory or local Windows. So they'll hang out and say local Windows, and at about 7 hours, this is what it was for us. Happens faster depends on the tenant. They'll just kind of hang out there, then they'll just switch to cloud only. But you have to do password hashes, which is normally the way you do it. But just an important thing. Many of the workstations changed just fine. There were some that went into this forever loop of reboots, and really there was a confusion between BitLocker, the policy, the compliance. So that was kind of an issue that was happening for a few, and it really was because what we would have done different and we have done different is there was already some mismatch between the group policy and the Intune policies that we're pushing down. But remember, in our scenario we had before, our site-to-site VPN tunnel was just like, it was kind of going up and down. So workstations couldn't even get the latest group policy information. So we just couldn't fix it. Most organizations don't have that problem. But if you had like this remote computer that isn't VPNing in at all or having issues VPNing and you have Intune, that could be something. So we had to replace and we replaced some devices because it was just part of a refresh, and some devices that they had, we just had to wipe it. Now, when you do the wipe, it's okay because, again, when they get wiped and they connect to Azure Active Directory, they still had their files, they still had everything they need. And by the way, people will ask, and I'm sorry to put this in here, like, well, how did they get all that stuff beforehand? So we use a capability in OneDrive that you can push as a GPO early. If you're not hybrid join, or you can do through Intune, that basically says, hey, put all of the people's workstations, get their what they call other well-known files folders, like your My Documents, like your desktop, those sorts of things, and application settings, all those kinds of things, and it basically migrates and copies that into their OneDrive area. So all this happens to prepare them behind the scenes. They're not doing anything. So if they did go to another computer, if they did get it wiped, they still have that. What about the applications that were there? Well, if you wiped it, obviously that's going to be gone. But these are things that we work on. And another project we onboarding Windows 10 for Microsoft 365, so we can control a lot of those and push applications. But that wasn't the focus for this talk or this particular project. So that's, these are kind of our results. And the nice thing is when we went through this, even for the computers we wiped, remember all of our stuff's in OneDrive or Teams or SharePoint, we had zero data loss. So that was, worked out really well for us. And that was kind of a key requirement. And the assumptions we had that there wouldn't be any kind of other business critical applications that would really, have a lot of pain would be affected, and that actually worked out and became true. So really, when we do this project for customers, part of this is, it's a discovery part because we have to look at, well, what do you have for authentication, for local Active Directory? We want to take a look at your line of business applications, kind of give guidance. But a lot of this is, but in the project, we don't actually do it because you might decide, I'll do it in 6 months or 9 months. But it's a path to understand it. And the biggest one are really the workshops, because when you do this line of business, explanation, you normally have to do it with a business multiple times, right? You talk to one group, then another group wants to talk about it, then another group wants to talk about it, and then they're like, well, can we bring in our provider that manages that thing? Because they're fearful. Don't let other companies that provide you the software detour you, because they will, because of many of them have not embraced or know this very well. But it's really easy for us to talk to, like, but we have to have this Active Directory. Like, cool. Like, do you extend the schema? No. Okay. Do you just read properties from Active Directory? Yes. Do you just ask it to log in? Do you read any specific properties into Active Directory or its attributes? No. Okay. So you're just worried about the login. Right. All right. Well, we can still handle that with Azure Active Directory domain services. And they're like to say, well, we don't know what that is. We think it's a problem. Guys, it's okay. It's Active Directory. It'll be fine. So those are the things that we normally we kind of go through. If you have custom applications that did extend the schema, which means you probably wrote it like 15 years ago, because that was kind of in vogue back then, but it's not really anymore. But that is something to really dive into. Anyway, so this is kind of our approach to do it when customers do this kind of a project with us. But this is something you have to evaluate regardless of with us or anybody else. So anyway, that's kind of what I was going to talk through today. Hopefully it gives you an idea of what you have to think about, what you have to be concerned about, what to get there. It is achievable. It can be done. We have loved it ever since we turned it off a couple of years ago, because it's just less stuff for us to manage. And we had more headaches than it was really worth. And now we manage everything without it, and it's fantastic. So anyway, that's what I have for today.
Great. Thank you very much, Conrad. As a reminder, Agile IT Tech Talks are a service for our MSP and CSP clients. These demos and sessions are provided live, where we can provide Q&A to our clients. For those of you watching online on YouTube, on our blog, feel free to leave a comment down below. Give us a like and follow, and thanks for joining us.